Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 128 of Radio Gore-Press. We are your hosts today. I say that as if it's anyone else.
It was someone else last time.
Yeah, for the first time in months. I'm Phil, as a lot of you hopefully already know. And with me, as always, is Sarah. How are you doing, Sarah?
I'm all right. Can't get rid of me.
Yeah, you're like the anchor to this, like, you're keeping the Gore-Press boat afloat. That's what anchors do.
I mean, no. The clue is in the name, Phil. They anchor them down.
Yeah, you're the reason we're not going anywhere, Sarah.
Yeah, I am weighing you all down.
No,
with my relentless misanthropy. I'm all right. I'm good. Did you ask?
How are you doing, Sarah?
Just preemptively saying that I'm fine. Yeah, I'm all right. The sun is shining. We're recording at 7 p.m. and it's still gloriously sunny outside.
It is, and it's light. It's not just like, yeah, it's light. It's light.
Yeah.
It's nice.
So I'm happy about that.
I hear that.
Summer is on the way. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm also good. I'm looking forward to the bank holiday weekend, and I've also got some time off booked soon, in early May. Finally taking back all the overtime I did the other week, and combining that with 2 days of annual leave to get the entire week off, which would be nice.
Oh, you jammy git.
Yeah.
Is that for your birthday?
Yeah. Cause
Cinco de Philip.
Bank holiday Monday, 2 days off annual leave, 2 days off overtime.
Excellent.
Entire week. Looking forward to that. We should probably talk about a movie.
Okay.
You're the one that's been hyping this up, Sarah. I
know.
Remind you.
I know. I'm nervous.
Ooh, interesting.
Because it's very rare that we cover actual classic movies that are so revered that they are considered like top 10 all-time classic horror movies. So I'm nervous AF this week because I'm scared that I'm not going to do this film justice.
Interesting.
Or that my opinions will be considered controversial, or
trust me. Between the two of us, I'm sure. I'm the one that's going to have the controversial opinions.
I mean, I'm just going to have to try very hard not to make this an hour of pro-vegan sentiment. So I apologise in advance that I'm going to bring it up. Please don't turn off. I don't hate meat eaters. I'm not a judgy one. But yeah, Texas Chain Saw Massacre. It's about darn time.
That is the subtitle of the film. It's called Texas Chain Saw Massacre. It's about darn time.
That makes it sound like some cutesy comedy. Set in the South. Well, it is set in the South, but like in the sort of cutesy, like Dollywood.
The quaint South rather than
yes,
rather than murdery South.
Yes. Is that how we're distinguishing?
Yeah.
This bit's a bit murdery. This bit's all right.
That's the only two states of not states. States is a bad word.
It is when we're discussing America.
Yeah.
So before we get too far into it, I don't have a synopsis because I have. Do you know what? Controversial. I've got the DVD in front of me, and there's nothing on the back.
Okay.
Which was like. Through me, firstly, and then I peeled back that, and it's got a big synopsis there, but it's just about the discs.
Oh, really?
That is no description of the film.
But it's all in German.
Not this week, God, no. No, hopefully there'll be no terrible pronunciation of German. I make no promises, though. So I'm going to pass the mantle to you for this.
Yeah, got on. Good old Google coming up strong.
Googly.
Yeah. When Sally hears that her grandfather's grave may have been vandalised, she and her paraplegic brother, Franklin, set out with their friends to investigate. After a detour to their family's old farmhouse, they discover a group of crazed, murderous outcasts living next door. As the group is attacked one by the chainsaw-wielding Leatherface, who wears a mask of human skin, the survivors must do everything they can to escape. That's the movie.
It's pretty Excuse the term. It's pretty bare bones.
The synopsis or the plot?
Both.
Okay.
Both. In terms of story, I've got to be careful what I say. See, this is it. I'm worried I want to piss people off. I do like this film, straight off the bat.
I mean, pissing people off is a good way to get, attention.
Is that how we're going to get clicks now? Just controversy.
This will go viral because it's just such a terrible take on this film.
Straight out of the gate, I like this film. I recognise it as being incredibly important and pivotal to the genre.
Mm-hmm.
I respect it in terms of messaging.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think it looks a lot better than I remembered, certainly in places.
Mm-hmm.
And I fully hold my hands up and recognise what it has done, for the genre since.
Mm.
It's so referenced. It's so homaged. There's no denying the impact that it's had culturally.
Mm-hmm.
Do I love it? I hadn't seen it in about, I want to say 8 to 10 years.
Okay.
It's one that I watched a lot as a teenager, so I think I overdid it a bit.
Okay, yeah, one of those movies.
Yeah. How about you? Is it one you were super familiar with?
I had not watched this movie.
Fuck
at all.
off.
I know, right?
Are you kidding?
I'm not kidding. No, I think again one of those. It's one of those movies, and we've talked about this sort of thing before. It's one of those movies that's just become so entrenched in pop culture that you feel like you've seen it. And I was watching, and I was like, I have not seen this movie.
Do you know it?
Or if I have, I've
really...
seen it. It was a long time ago, and I've forgotten about it since.
What's really strange that you say that is Dan had exactly the same experience as you last night. He was so sure he'd seen it. And then throughout, he was just like, I don't think I've ever seen this.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the sort of thing, and I think that's what not puts me off a lot of horror movies, but they become so familiar to you, regardless of whether you've seen them or not, because everyone knows these iconic scenes.
So, what is it that puts you off exactly? Is it because you literally feel like you've seen it before, so it's just going to feel too familiar? Do you feel like it's been built up too much because it's so heavily referenced that it couldn't? It's never going to meet your expectations.
I mean, more the first. Okay. 'Cause I'm aware how kind of hype can really ruin a movie, and unless I'm particularly excited for it myself, I think I can I've gotten pretty good at tempering my expectations.
Okay.
But I think it is more about feeling like it's already familiar to you, even though you haven't seen it before.
Oh, you're a sneaky one. I had no idea you'd never seen this.
I surprised myself. But again, and I think this is probably going to... I feel I need to get this off my chest right from the start. For those of you who don't know, I am not the world's greatest slasher fan.
Is it do you think it's a slasher?
Actually... That is a fair point. That is a fair point. I think it's one
that I would call it a slasher movie.
You're probably right, actually. And I think as soon as you asked me that question, I'm like, wait a minute. Because obviously, certainly around that era, slashers became very not similar, but they established tropes pretty quickly. And
there hadn't been that many slashers by 1974.
Oh, of course not, no.
Not in the traditional sense, anyway. Obviously, Psycho, which ironically is also based on Ed Gein.
Yeah. But it doesn't have any of the...
Tom.
Yeah, it doesn't have that kind of evangelical, very moralistic kind of backbone that you find, the idea of don't do drugs or you'll die, don't have sex or you'll die. That
don't
sort of
pick up
attitude.
Hitchhikers or you'll die.
Right. It didn't have that kind of vein running through it, and that's something you obviously often find in slasher movies. Interesting. That's a fair point, actually.
Yeah,
but then I don't know what I would call it if not a slasher, because at the same time it does. It is largely sort of personalityless, monstrous, kind of hulking figure wearing a mask with a kind of household
phallic
tool as a weapon. Yeah. So
well,
there are kind of some familiarities,
Yeah. I'm wondering if that's stuff that again has come since, though.
I think you're right. I think I remember reading that kind of inspired a lot of the later slasher movies because it was so iconic. This is the sort of thing. And I think it's.
I mean, it's always going to be a challenge to put yourself in the frame of mind of it having been released in 1974, especially if you're coming to it with fresh eyes now.
I mean, because it's the same sort of attitude I have towards bands like the Beatles. I'm not a huge fan of the Beatles.
I hate the Beatles. That's the most controversial thing I'm going to say this episode.
Okay, well at least we've set a benchmark now. But I can see the impact they had on the shape of music. And I think that's the same with this movie as well. Like, yes, it's probably not the best example of its genre, but. Mm-hmm. Again, it walked so other movies could run, right? Not to downplay its kind of like impact.
It's really weird.
It did lay the foundations, at least.
It definitely did. Interestingly, it's kind of noted as being one of the first, if not the first, instances of the masked killer actually wielding a weapon of sorts, which is absolutely proto-slasher territory.
For sure.
Especially in terms of, I mean, it's always such a phallic weapon, isn't it? And they're always chasing young, nubile women.
But at the same time, I think not to, like, I'm sure there are sort of all sorts of gender things you can read into it, but at the same time, it's hard to injure people with something that's concave.
That sounds like a challenge.
Just someone running around with like a vacuum cleaner trying to...
That's a film I'd watch.
Doesn't quite have the same effect, right?
The Texas Hoover Massacre. Oh my God, can someone make that immediately? Right, let's go back to the beginning.
Okay.
The intro.
Mm-hmm.
Was that immediately familiar to you, despite having not seen the film? Because you must have seen some of the more recent.
So yes, but not probably for the reason you're thinking of.
Okay.
And I felt very vindicated at this because I watched this movie, and again, I feel like a Philistine saying it, but my instinct was to jump to Alexandre Aja's remake of The Hills Have Eyes, because that kind of has a similar opening in that it's quite peaceful, but interspersed by very sharp cuts to horrific imagery, very quick cuts away to like high contrast horrific imagery. Mm-hmm. And that was my first kind of thought. And going through and looking at the legacy this film has, Alexandre Aja does cite it as one of his influences.
Oh, yeah. I can absolutely see that.
So I felt quite vindicated for that.
You spotted a thing.
So that was why it seems familiar. But again, I think that's probably not the reason you're getting at.
Well, just because obviously the formats have been different. The style has been very different in all of the sequels and the remakes and the reboots and the requels and whatever the fuck terms we're using now.
Mm.
And I don't know if it's because it's been used again and again, or if I'm just so familiar with this film. But as soon as that kind of, I can't even describe that weird discordant noise that's like throughout, but especially prevalent at the beginning. That noise just does something to me. Like, I don't know, man. It makes me feel squicky.
I think I remember reading that there isn't any actual music as such, other than like tracks they've licensed.
There's diegetic music,
that
the characters are listening to.
Other than
there's
ones
no
licensed,
soundtrack.
But there's the only soundtrack in inverted commas is actually sounds they've used and recorded from a slaughterhouse, apparently.
Yeah, I read somewhere that they said they wanted, which is definitely something I'm going to get to when I go on my vegan rant later.
Mm-hmm.
Like they wanted the soundtrack to mimic what an animal would hear in a slaughterhouse.
Yeah.
But I don't know what it is that they've used to produce that particular sort of high-pitched, discordant sound.
Yeah.
But it creeps me the hell out. And it takes me right back to being a teenager and watching this for the first time and going, oh, God, what the fuck film have I just put on? This is going to creep me out. And it feels like the sort of thing... It's interesting that you mentioned the Hills Have Eyes remake, because that's not actually something that occurred to me. But it feels like the intro with that, like, John Larroquette voiceover, which obviously they kind of used again in the latest Texas Chain Saw movie. It feels like the sort of thing that, like, the Conjuring universe has tried to replicate. That sort of... It's very dated now, isn't it?
Yeah.
But obviously the Conjuring universe is effectively period pieces. And it feels like that's the sort of... Now, I'm name-checking The Conjuring. It's just the first thing that kind of sprang to mind. But it feels like the sort of thing that's been mimicked a lot, but not ever done to quite this effect.
Yeah.
I don't think, anyway.
I think it's tough because, again, sensibilities were different. Like, you know, this one cuts to kind of prosthetic kind of corpses on the floor, very juicy, very bloody.
Juicy, that's horrible.
That's one of the words I wrote down. Very juicy.
Last week was a hella gooey film. This one is not nearly as gooey.
Whereas you think about, just to use it again, the remake of Hills Have Eyes, that cuts to actual photos of babies with birth defects and kids with birth defects, and that is, in terms of shock value alone, I think that's a lot more shocking. But again, I think that's largely down to sensibilities changing. And in fact, you know, I'm sure we'll get to it later, but Toby Hooper made a conscious effort to keep gore at a minimum for this film.
I can't believe he thought he was going to walk away with a PG. As if he thought he was going to walk away with a PG certificate. Come on. And then they just went, no, immediate X, which is like porn. That's the porn certificate in America, isn't it? So, like, that's an instant kind of death knell for your film. And
except not really.
Well, not these days. But they made cuts and it was released with an R. Was this ever banned in the UK?
Yes.
Was it?
I think so. I think I remember reading it. I feel like to look it up now, but
I couldn't
pretty
remember.
Sure I did have a...
That's interesting. I didn't have this on the on my mental list of banned movies. It wouldn't surprise me, actually. But obviously this is something we've talked about quite a lot. It's almost, not quite, but almost bloodless.
It's crazy. It is bizarre, isn't it? How just clean is a bad word, but in terms of blood on screen. Yeah.
And I mean, it was during an era where there were kind of somewhat gory films. And I mean, 1974 was sort of when Giallo was kind of heading towards its peak. And of course, Giallo movies, as a general tradition, had that very sort of lurid red blood Grand Guignol kind of splattery feel to them. So it wasn't like it was a limitation of the time period. In fact, it was sort of bucking the trend, if anything, by that point. Because, I mean, even like The Exorcist, when was that? Was that the same year? I've
got a sense it was 74 as well, actually, now that you mention it.
And that was really fucking gross in places.
Yeah.
Really quite, maybe graphic isn't the wrong word.
73.
73. Oh, so a year earlier. But yeah, so there was a precedent for quite gory films by that point. So it's interesting that he chose to, I mean, I'm guessing budgetary restraints played a part. But it's quite an interesting choice that he took to rein it in so much in order to try and garner this PG rating, which absolutely worked against him when it came down to it.
Yeah, because everyone remembers it as I mean, I've spoken to a couple of people since watching this movie, and everyone like, oh yeah, it's really bloody. I'm like, actually no. And it's bizarre because it just goes to show how powerful the human imagination is, because you remember it being bloody, you remember seeing blood, but actually you pay attention and there barely is any.
Well, that's basically what worked against him when it came to certification, because the censors decided that the imagination is so powerful that what you don't see becomes far more traumatizing than what you may have seen.
Yeah.
So I tried to know every time there was any gore during the film, and I got 4 instances, which were the hitchhiker, obviously, is the one that everyone remembers. The hitchhiker cutting his hand and cutting Franklin. There is a little bit of blood on the meat hook. There is a little bit of splatter when Franklin is killed. And there is the cutting of the finger, the dinner scene, and that's basically it until the final moment.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but then you got to that. Yep, yeah, it's bonkers, isn't it?
It's crazy
for a film called Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Only like 2 people are killed with a chainsaw. I mean, they could sue this production for the Trades Description Act.
False advertising.
It is. I'm big mad. It was barely even a massacre. What constitutes a massacre?
I don't know how you expect me to know. But certainly I would expect more than, 4 people? 5 people?
I mean...
4 people. 4 people. Sally got away.
1, 2, 3... Something like that, sure. Are we to assume that the truck driver at the end bites the dust as well?
I don't know. And I did read that Pam, the actress who plays Pam, was convinced her character got away. She in her head, she's got a head canon that it was like, yeah, she's a fighter. She found her way out of the freezer and got away.
Oh, Pam, that's dreadfully optimistic. I don't share that notion. I don't know about you. But yeah, this was one of several films inspired by Ed Gein.
Yes.
Obviously, the was he called The Butcher of Plainfield, I believe.
Take your word for it.
I think if memory serves, to dig through the recesses of my true crime brain, I think he only actually murdered 2 people.
Yeah, that's why it's a bit of a misnomer calling him a serial killer, because he didn't kill enough to qualify. It was mostly
serial grave robber.
It was a grave robbing that he did.
Yeah. Which, I mean, is
well, that's
gross.
Okay then. Like we're not saying that's okay, of course.
It's fine. They're already dead. They're not going to know. Do you know what? I, as an agnostic who doesn't believe in the afterlife, when I die, if you want to make a lamp out of me, fill your boots. Genuinely. I would love a bone lamp. I would love to own a bone lamp. If I get to be that bone lamp for somebody else.
There we go. We've got it recorded on a podcast episode, guys. Yeah. You heard it here first. That counts as legal confirmation.
Yeah, I consent. This is like an oral version of a donor card. Bob's your uncle. Done. Yeah, that's not legally binding. We could say whatever we wanted. It can't be legally binding, Phil. Don't create that precedent. So, what do you think of Leatherface as a villain?
Again, hard to differentiate him because that archetype has become so popular. The idea of this hulking, silenced monster, devoid
he's
of personality.
Not totally silent.
No, but he's mostly devoid of personality, mostly silent.
Yeah,
has become so archetypical in the genre.
Good, quick question.
Yes.
How many of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films have you seen?
I think this is the one and only one I've seen.
Are you shitting me?
No,
You've not even seen the Platinum Dunes remake?
No.
That 2003 classic, which I will defend to my death.
Horror, a terrible horror fan whenever I disappoint you, Sarah.
No, you haven't disappointed me. You just surprised me.
I know. There's some weird gaps in my horror knowledge.
There are some of the Texas Chainsaw Massacres I wish I'd never seen. Sadly, I think I've seen all but one.
Okay.
I haven't seen Leatherface, which I believe was the prequel that came out like 4 years ago.
With Alexandra Daddario.
No, that was the one before that.
Oh, okay.
Which was fucking dog shit.
Yeah, but Alexandra
I'm not going to mince my
Daddario,
words. No. Spoiler alert for that film. It turns out that she finds out she's a relative of Leatherface.
Oh.
Like a distant cousin. And at one point decides to side with him and yells the words, "Do your thing, cuz." It's awful. It's awful. If you
Sounds
could die
amazing.
of cringe... If I could die of cringe, I'd be a bone lamp already. Honestly. I have seen that film once when it came out, which was, I think, close to a decade ago. And that line is still seared into my memory.
Living
That's how bad it
rent-free
was.
in your mind.
Yep. Oh, I hate it. So that's interesting. This film is your only frame of reference for Leatherface.
Yeah.
Because he has been portrayed, I think, wildly differently. Particularly in the newest film, the straight to Netflix gem, Texas Chain Saw Massacre. Because why name it anything else? That's what we do now. Scream 5? Nah, just Scream. I hate that too. I'm such an old grump. But yeah, in the latest one, he's kind of, I mean, he would be like, I don't know, 80 by now. I'm not good at maths. He'd be really old by now. He'd be a super old dude.
I mean, it's 2024 will be its 50th anniversary.
Yeah, there we go. So like, we already see more of his face than I'm comfortable with. That's not the Leatherface that I know. And he's just like, he really is silent in the new one. He is just this hulking, quiet, slow menace of a thing. He's more like Michael Myers than anything.
I was going to say more like a Jason or a Michael Myers.
Yeah, and it I don't know, man. It threw me.
I think what the character that reminded me most, strangely, is Lenny from Of Mice and Men.
Okay.
In a weird way, that kind of like, I mean, it's really not a good frame of reference because like Lenny's supposed to be really gentle and clumsy more than anything.
Yeah.
But that idea of like,
just side note, I still get PTSD when I think about that film. I watched that in school when I studied Of Mice and Men. Steinbeck, Puritans, don't come at me. I've read the book too. But it ruined me. It ruined me, that ending scene. I'll never forgive Gary Sinise. Carry on.
No, like, I think it was that idea of this kind of like big but very, very intellectually challenged character. That's really as far as the similarities go.
I was kind of hesitant to talk about this a little bit, but we kind of have to, don't we? Like in the trivia that I read, there was a piece about Tobe Hooper basically leaving the characterization completely up to Gunnar Hansen.
Yeah.
Who I think Marilyn Burns had actually convinced to come on board.
He wasn't keen, was he?
No, he thought it was too violent. And now he's still doing convention appearances, I think. Is he alive? Oh God, I'm gonna feel terrible.
You said you were gonna look it up in case you said something stupid. And here you are questioning yourself.
I remembered to look up Tobe Hooper, who died in 2017, God rest his soul. And I forgot to look up Gunnar Hansen. I think he's still alive. I know Marilyn Burns passed away in like 2014 as well.
He died in 2015.
God damn it. Oh man. This has become a really depressing show all of a sudden. At least Gilbert Gottfried's not in it. Jesus. But yeah, so Tobe Hooper kind of left the characterization completely up to Gunnar Hansen, and he decided that the character would be, in the trivia that I read, they described him as mentally handicapped, which is not the verbiage that we use these days. That's not the terminology that's accepted. I don't really know what would be the right terminology. I guess just mentally disabled, right?
I don't know enough about kind of the current, kind of the way it should be described, I suppose.
developmentally disabled.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
yeah.
I know there was a good few years back we weren't supposed to use the term disabled at all, and then the disabled community went, no, we're disabled. Like, call a spade a spade. So he studied, he went to like a children's school and studied the intellectually disabled children there. And actually people have sort of praised him for kind of nailing it.
I was quite surprised. It seemed very on the nose and a bit not insensitive, but it seems like exploitative, I think, perhaps. But the dedication that Gunnar Hansen did, the actual to actually use that as a starting point and to find the wanky way of putting it, but find the truth in it, find the actual like realism in it.
Yeah,
like that's quite commendable, because it's so easy to like,
oh, you're a bad guy, just be a bad guy.
Well, not just that, but just like, you know, you're kind of, you know, if you've got kind of special needs, for example, then you think about, you take no effort to actually study what that means and to look into what that means.
That's true.
That's true. Have this image in your head, and the image is inevitably awful because it's just every nasty stereotype you've ever seen.
Yeah, that's true.
But to actually go out of his way and to approach it like an actor, and to research it rather than just kind of exploit it, I think that's quite commendable.
I think
whether I agree with that choice or not, you know.
This is it. This is what I was about to say. Like, I think it's an interesting choice, and I think it's a reasonably impressive performance, especially considering that he was kind of, I mean, they all had a terrible experience, but the fact that he was kind of behind a mask where he didn't have any peripheral vision, wearing 3-inch heels, lumbering about, being 6'7", like,
in a suit,
wielding
in the
a fucking
Texas
chainsaw.
Summer.
100-degree heat. Like, it's not going to be a pleasant experience anyway. But I think, those choices aside, I think the danger perhaps is that he's a murderer. I think it's one thing to say, oh, he's intellectually disabled, but then to, I don't know, like him killing people for sport and making furniture out of them, those two then become inextricably linked.
It's like sorry to interrupt, but it's like what we were getting at towards the end of the I was going to say Slumber Party Massacre, but it wasn't. It was Sleepaway Camp. That kind of idea of a character's kind of individual quirks and individual personality being inextricably linked with their actions. Yeah.
Which is not to say like everyone with an intellectual disability is some sort of saint. That would also be dehumanizing because that robs them of nuance, you know?
Of course, yeah.
But also, like, I don't know. I'm not saying I find it problematic. I'm just saying that is the only instance where I could maybe see people taking issue with it.
I mean, also there is, and that's perhaps why I mentioned Sleepaway Camp as well. There is a element. I think this is
like it's been foisted on them. The choice has
no.
Been made for
what I was
them,
going to say, I think this has been kind of confirmed as well. The idea of Leatherface having kind of a gender dysphoria as well. Again, it's what we touched at when we talked about Sleepaway Camp. The idea of like a man dressed as a woman being inherently tied to being a monster. We've seen it in Psycho. We've seen it in Texas Chain Saw. We've seen it in Sleepaway Camp.
Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah, and it's an odd one to wrap your head around because we've become so much more aware of these sort of issues in recent years, and about time, to be fair. You know, it's hard to look at these movies as products of their time rather than criticize them for what they said with today's kind of standards in mind.
It's interesting that you say that because that's not a point that I'd heard brought up. I know, obviously, he does have different masks that he wears, and apparently that was a choice based on, like, he had different facets of his personality, and that each one was represented by a different face, as such. Literally, in this case.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Is that something that Toby Hooper said?
I will need to check that. I will need to kind of... It's something I remember reading about it, but I was dumb and didn't make actual notes about it. And again, it probably has a similar thing where different films kind of have that different takes on the subject. And so...
Oh, yeah, of course.
You know,
yeah.
whether... well, I don't know. This one could be... This interpretation could be slightly different, for example, to the sequels that came out, you know?
So, coming back to Leatherface, do you see him as perhaps also a victim of sorts?
Yeah, well, I think that's yeah.
Because he was like, you get the impression that this is so. Obviously, little bits of backstory here and there that we get. Mostly in the first kind of third, there's some exposition about the slaughterhouse having kind of automated some of the procedures and a lot of the workers were laid off. Do you think it was that drove the family to do this, or do you think it's just like a familial tradition that had been going on far longer?
I think there is a kind of a not anti-capitalist per se, but kind of there is that sort of like critique of industrialism and mechanization of jobs and the effect they have on people. I think that is a theme that runs through the film, because that's certainly, you know, they talk about the grandfather being a killer. You know, it all seemed to me to strike more at the roles they used to have before the slaughterhouse got mechanized. Okay. And then that being kind of realigned, readjusted into a different circumstance, you know?
Different prey.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. That fits with mostly my understanding of it, definitely. I mean, the weirdest family unit I think I've ever seen. I can't even figure out the relation between any of them. It's certainly a little bit different in the remake, from what I remember at least, because there were no female members in this one, whereas there were in the remake. And that kind of, I don't know, that made a little bit more sense to me. But then perhaps that explains one of Leatherface's masks. Yeah,
and I guess there's you know, if they all had the family tradition of working in the slaughterhouse, for example, then it would make sense that it's kind of a male unit. The family itself is a male unit because they're the ones that have gone through finding themselves being made redundant due to, you know,
I see. Just some casual misogyny, Philip, because women can't work in slaughterhouses. I see.
1974, Sarah. Again, product of its time.
So, obviously, I want to talk about some of the themes in a little bit. I just want to talk more about that dinner scene. Now, obviously, it's no secret at this point. All of the actors involved have gone on record to talk about how absolutely dreadful that experience was. I think John Duggan, the guy who played the grandfather, that in the old man makeup, he hated it. Like, it was obviously height of the Texas summer. They were working 7 days a week, 16-hour days some days, and once he got the makeup on, he was just like, I can't repeat this process. So we have to film all of these scenes right now. And they ended up between them doing a 36-hour day because he couldn't bear to have the makeup taken off and put back on.
That's crazy, isn't it?
So I think a lot of the reactions were, I mean, they basically weren't acting by that point, though. They'd all gone kind of loony.
And I think you can see, I mean, we'll come to it. I think you can see that in the scene itself.
Yeah.
Like, the whole thing becomes just chaos.
For sure. And I think sort of from that point onwards, you can sort of see the anguish on Marilyn Burns' face very clearly. I mean, give that woman the Oscar, because I don't think I've ever seen a horror movie performance that convincing.
Yeah.
She was terrified. But I think that's one of the reasons that it kind of lives on in horror fans' imaginations quite as much as it does. Because that was such a visceral, raw performance.
It was like Shelley Duvall in The Shining as well. You know, obviously different reasons, but she was similarly terrorised for. It's funny you should say that.
It's funny you should say that, because when Dan and I were watching it last night, and I was reading through the trivia and how, you know, they were effectively tortured in these awful filming conditions, and I was just like, oh, he Kubricked her, dear. So that's a describing word now. But yeah, they basically said that they were, I think I remember reading it was about a 40-day shoot.
Okay.
Thereabouts. And because they were so strapped for cash and so terrified of continuity errors, almost all of the cast were wearing the exact same outfits from start to finish.
Yep.
And because of the accumulation of blood and bodily fluids, they couldn't wash the outfits. And I believe Gunnar Hansen particularly just stunk to high heaven by the end of it, and people didn't want to be near him.
Yeah.
And they were all so depressed. And I don't know how I feel about that. I really don't. I don't know. As much as I do respect this film, and it's, like I've said, its cultural impact, especially on the horror landscape, I don't know that I agree with going to those lengths to get the performance. I think that is...
Yeah, I mean, whether it's... The thing is, you don't know the circumstance. You know, I think this film, it's very easy to look at it and think, and look at its cultural impact and think, and put it in leagues with the films we see today. But actually, you know, at that point, they had a shoestring budget. It was you know, more of an amateur production, I would imagine.
I think I read somewhere that the initial budget was supposed to be 60 grand.
Yeah, and they went 80 grand over budget, didn't they?
And they went 80 grand over in editing.
Yeah.
And most of the actors came away with like a few $100s by the end of the production, because there was no money left. It turns out that the production had basically been run by people in the mafia.
Yeah.
They'd been taken for an absolute ride, and the producer had used it to launder money from the production of Deep Throat, which I believe he was prosecuted for.
Yeah, he was, and then they sued him because of it, and then got some money back.
And divvied up the money between them. So, I mean, imagine going through all that and coming away with like 400 quid. Holy shit.
Doesn't seem worth it, does it, really?
None of it's... I mean, you'd have to pay me at least 450. And agree to turn me into a bone lamp. Only then would I agree.
That's the important thing, yeah, the bone lamp, because that's the...
Yeah, that's the hill I'm dying on. So, quickly back to the soundtrack.
Yes.
And a segue into my vegan propaganda for this episode. Oh, don't hate me,
You've teased it long enough, Sarah.
Don't hate me. I find it interesting that I've been vegan for, I can't remember, it's 5 or 6 years, and I was vegetarian for quite a few years before that. And it's never occurred to me until this viewing of the film that this is basically like vegetarian propaganda.
Yeah.
And I Googled it and I searched high and low, and apparently Toby Hooper didn't necessarily intend that, but he said himself after making it, he went vegetarian for 4 years. He didn't eat meat for 4 years. Apparently Guillermo del Toro has also gone on record to say that he went vegetarian after watching it, which I found really cool. But yeah, it had never occurred to me until this viewing, and I'm vaguely ashamed about that because it seems so bloody obvious.
Yeah. Now. I think so it feels like more of a wrapping up thing to say, so I don't know, perhaps I won't go too much into it. But this film, I kind of have a complicated feelings towards this film.
Okay, in what sense?
So, as a film taken on surface level, I don't rate it.
Okay.
I don't. That's probably a bit of a controversial thing to say, but it feels like those first 4 kills are near identical.
Okay.
Like, Franklin sends Pam and Kirk out. Kirk goes into the thing, gets killed. Pam goes into the house, gets killed, and then Franklin sends Jerry out to the house, and Jerry gets killed. And those first three kills are just the same, rinse and repeat the same thing, and they're over with. For all this talk of like a group of teenagers being terrorized by Leatherface, 3 out of 5 of them only see Leatherface for a minute, and then they're dead.
Okay.
And it just seems they just seem very samey, and
hard disagree, but okay.
Yeah, and this is part of the reason why I was looking forward to talking about it, because I'm willing to change my mind, because but then
I'm not looking to change your mind.
But then I'm thinking about it, like, well, actually, if you're looking at it from the idea of the vegetarianism angle, the idea of it being a kind of a commentary on the meat industry, for example, then actually the idea of cows passing through a slaughterhouse in the same way is perfectly in line with with what goes on in the film. Jerry, Pam, and Kirk all experience basically the same end in the same way.
Yeah, that's just what I was about to say. Like, they are literally treated like cattle. They're clubbed over the head. They're hung on meat hooks. They're torn apart by a chainsaw. I mean, that's exactly what we put animals through. We view them as a commodity. We torture them. We slaughter them. And I can't believe it hadn't occurred to me until this viewing that, like, of course, it's putting the audience, it's asking difficult questions. It's putting them in that position.
Yeah.
And I mean, add to that the soundtrack of sounds that animals would hear in a slaughterhouse, and the absurdity and the cruelty of the family. And actually, we think of that as normal when it's animals that are on the menu. It's only absurd and cruel when it's humans that are on the menu. It's crazy, isn't it? And I think it's really interesting when viewed through that lens.
Yeah.
And I think it adds something to the viewing.
For sure, and that's why I'm a bit like, my feelings are complicated, because what else was I going to say? I was going to comment on something else as well. Oh yeah, the idea, like, similarly, and I don't know if this is perhaps a symptom of the type of film. Like, to me, I really appreciate when the characters feel like they exist outside of the film. Whether it's kind of silly references to jokes they have, or like anecdotes, or something similar, just something to show they exist outside of the hour and a half that the film goes on for. Yeah. And this film, and I could be wrong, it's a feeling that I kind of like picked up on halfway through, and then haven't been paying quite enough attention to actually be able to kind of verify. It feels like the characters only exist within the confines of the movie. And again, that's something I find with a few slashers. I think the characters are all very reactive to what goes on, and I don't know, I struggle with that sort of thing. But like I said, if they're all kind of cattle in inverted commas.
What do you mean by reactive?
Well, reactive is probably a bad word, but it just feels like things happen to them and they have little to no agency, and perhaps Sally's the exception, but I don't know. I haven't. It's kind of a half-formed thought in my head. It's a problem I have with a lot of films of this genre. Even I think
I agree to a point. I think it's difficult. I mean, it's what, an 82-minute, 83-minute film.
Yeah, it's short.
It's very short. It's very snappy. You have a limited window in which to present these characters, and they are picked off very quickly.
Quickly, yeah.
There's almost no time to get to know them, but I think there's just enough. I will agree that maybe like the dialogue doesn't do the best job of setting up these pre-existing interpersonal relationships. I'll give you that, definitely. I don't know. I think I wouldn't say I particularly took to any of the characters.
Yeah, and they're all a bit awful, aren't they? That was my other comment.
Yes.
I mean, poor Franklin.
Franklin was such a brat.
Well, I mean, yeah. So that was good. Yeah. So, like, yes, you know, he's wheelchair bound. He's paraplegic, and all of his friends go upstairs and start frolicking around the second floor of the house, and he's just stuck downstairs. But he just blows raspberries at them. And I'm like, I'm sorry, how old are these people supposed to be?
I know, like, firstly, that guy, like, you're 42, rein it in. Secondly, tone deaf to just waltz upstairs. Dick move. Yeah. Absolute dick move. I think it's really interesting that they had a wheelchair-bound character, because you still don't see that very much. Like, the only thing that springs to mind are a couple of the more recent Chucky sequels. But, I mean, how often do you see, like, a disabled protagonist?
Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, super ahead of its time in terms of that. Maybe still ahead of its time. Who knows? But, yeah, I think the characterization could have done with a little bit of work. I mean, even Sally, obviously most final girls are a bit of a kind of blank slate, but kind of Mary Sue's. They're puritanical. I don't know, just like nice girl next door.
Yeah, well, that's the template, right? They've got to be nice next doors, because you have to
want them to survive,
and if they sin, then they're going to be inevitably killed. So they need to be very bland as characters. They need to be, they tend to be, at least.
Yeah, and I think up until probably Scream, that didn't change. Which is insane to me, but. I don't know. I didn't warm to any of them. I didn't necessarily root for any of them or want them to survive. I was just like kind of, specifically on this viewing, somewhat numbly watching them get picked off. But then I guess that's because I'm super familiar with the film. I know how it's going to play out. Like,
I felt the same way. You know, I think it's.
Ironically, the irony is I'm far more comfortable watching humans get picked off than animals.
I think it's a rarity in films that you have characters that are so likable that you don't want them to die. Like, there's only a couple of films that pop to mind. Like, I always really like the couple in Willow Creek. I think they're very well written. But other than that, it's symptomatic of a lot of slasher movies like this, whether we're calling this one a slasher or not. They're just, all the characters tend to be kind of douchebags and a bit mean to each other, and I'm like, are you guys friends? I can't tell.
It's weird, isn't it? Like, there are always sort of these disparate groups where it's like they've taken one stock character from each of the from every subtype from the Breakfast Club and gone, you guys are a friendship. No. All of my friends are like me. Sarcastic
because that's how friends work.
Yeah. No, I do find that to be quite a funny trope in these films. But yeah, there wasn't one of them where I was just like, oh my God, I hope you make it to the end. I guess, like, Sally is fine. And I guess you're supposed to be like, oh, look at all she's been through. What a survivor. I can't really muster that. Does that make me a horrible person?
No, well...
I'm not mad that she survives. You go, girl.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's one of those things where she doesn't really seem to get her, not revenge per se, but, you know, we touched on it in, which was the film with the French director, the woman director,
Raw?
No, it was the rape revenge movie.
Revenge.
I'm an idiot. Yeah, revenge. Like,
you got there on your own, Phil.
It was a funny joke that I was making. But there's that whole like thing where she's like, yes, I am in charge now, effectively. Like, I'm the one. Yeah. I'm the one who is actively engaging and having agency in the film.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in Texas Chainsaw, she escapes. You know, she finds a moment and escapes. And aside from that, most of the time a lot of the time at least, she's at the behest of someone else.
Yeah, and as you say, she just kind of gets away, and it's not through any kind of smarts or tenacity. It's just because her killers are so fucking inept and bound to tradition.
Yeah.
That she sees an opportunity.
Yeah.
Sees and seizes an opportunity. I do love that ending though. With
the trucker that comes by, and
I absolutely adore that shot of her getting in the back of that truck, driving away, like cackling maniacally because she's completely lost the plot by that point.
Yeah.
And Leatherface in that glorious sunrise, Texas sunrise that looks fucking stunning. Can we give that a shout out?
There are a lot of shots that are really, really good looking in this.
I think it's funny because there are some shots that look terrible, particularly like the chases during the night.
It's just like an incompressible mess, isn't it?
Yeah, it's too
like
dark.
Black and highlights of blue is all you see.
Yeah, it's too dimly lit to get much of an impression of what's going on.
Which is,
kind of shitty.
A limitation of the technology they had and the budget they had.
The transfer, and there's a lot of contributing factors, I'm sure. But I think I'd forgotten, because there are scenes that look like shit, I'd forgotten how stunning some of them are. Because there are some really beautiful shots in this. And I think that's one of them. And I kind of love that frustrated sort of childlike spinning of the... Yeah, like that's his version of stamping his feet.
Yeah.
And I love that impotent kind of rage.
I think from what I've read, Gunnar Hansen was channeling all the frustration that he had from these horrendous shoots. Like,
oh man,
it was something like I could be misremembering, but it was something I'm not even sure he was told to do that. I think it was him doing it himself, and everyone's like, "Oh shit, record this."
She's like, "I'm gonna pretend the air's Toby Hooper."
Pretty much.
That's interesting. Do you know if they shot chronologically then? Would that have been towards the end of the
I think so, because I think like you said,
because they had to for continuity, I suppose.
And the stories all the clothes, the fact that Gunnar Hansen got more and more stinky as the time went on because his clothes weren't washed. Sally's clothes basically solidified because of all the fake blood that had just dried on them. They got really crispy and. So that's the only sort of things that can come out from shooting in chronological order or close to chronological order.
That's a good point. One last point that I really want to bring up before we kind of start to wrap up, I guess, is apparently Toby Hooper had kind of said he was inspired by filmmakers like George Romero, who had obviously been quite political with their work. And so he wanted to do something that meant something, that kind of made a statement.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because, again, it wasn't until this viewing of it that I realised, actually, it's kind of trying to say a lot. Like, it's making comments about the industrial system and how people are being squeezed out in favour of machines.
Yeah.
And left behind, and like skilled trades are a thing of the past, and you know, and that's still something that we're contending with. Everything's AI these days, you know.
Yeah, for sure. Which is why we need universal basic income.
Yes, maybe this isn't the forum for it. I think the people who can enact change are listening to this podcast, but I like your style. They're making a lot of points about the commodification of animals and how we view meat consumption and how weird it is and uncivilized it seems when the tables are turned and we are the meat. Like, I think that's a really interesting point. And also, completely besides that fact, like the sheer notion of this unthinkable violence. Like, I mean, this is kind of at the end of the Vietnam War. This is almost like a post-Vietnam War movie.
Yeah, actually, you say that. The guy who played the Hitchhiker, I can't remember the actor's name. He was saying that the shooting of this was one of the worst experiences that he's had, and he was he was in the Vietnam War.
Oh my God, that's saying something. But yeah, and post Watergate, and it was literally, I mean, the Vietnam War was kind of notable for being the first war that was literally televised.
Yeah.
So like, it's the first time people were kind of seeing these awful atrocities, like graphic stuff, straight to their TVs, which was really a big cultural shift. There'd obviously been media that existed, there'd been reporting on wars, there'd been, like, television had been around for a long time, but it's the first time it had sort of been quite so raw. So I think it's hard not to look at it in terms of that as well. Like, perhaps a comment on maybe the desensitization of audiences.
Yeah, and I think it's probably, you know, given my reaction, that makes a lot of sense, you know.
Yeah.
Because
the fact that you don't see it as being extreme at all.
Yeah.
Compared to, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, things do move on, don't they? Our expectations change, what we consume changes. It is interesting that we're sort of, as a society, we're kind of moving more towards being more offended by everything than ever. Like, everything can be deemed inappropriate. And yet, the TV and film that we're consuming is more violent than ever.
Yeah.
More R-rated than ever. I mean, look at stuff like The Boys, straight to Amazon Prime. I could never have dreamt that there would be such violent mainstream TV when I was a kid.
And the first scene, no less.
Yeah. And I mean, it's only in recent memory that the media was still scapegoating violent video games and movies for things like Columbine. So it's kind of crazy how far things have moved on in a relatively short space of time. It's just like, how much more violent could it get?
Yeah.
What are we going to be seeing in 10 years' time? It's weird. It is, yeah. It's bizarre to feel so desensitized.
It is, and I think this is perhaps why my feelings towards this film are so complicated, because with Cannibal Holocaust, they made a point right from the start to say this is a film about something going on. They wore that on their kind of sleeves, and so everything you watched through that film was kind of through this lens of being a critique of something.
Yeah.
Whereas I think they were more subtle, surprisingly, in Texas Chain Saw, and I think because of that, I was looking at it quite superficially at the start, and then thought, actually, well, what if this is a commentary on a number of things? But then because I'd had, half an hour, 45 minutes of feeling like I'm not really vibing with this movie, it was hard to like pull myself out of that. I think this film is probably one of those movies I need to mull on and then approach again and think, right, this film is about, commenting on vegetarianism, on, on kind of the mechanism of roles of kind of manual labor roles, and try and look at it through that lens. I think I'd probably appreciate it a lot more, but because I wasn't so aware of that,
it's hard to take all
reading.
That stuff in on your first watch anyway, because I mean, it's sort of, it's, as we were just saying, it's not like the most extreme film, especially by today's standards, but it's still kind of an assault on the senses.
Yeah, I mean, that
especially on first watch, I imagine.
That kind of dinner scene at the end. I mean, there's all sorts of. I mean, it's a messy scene, both physically and emotionally, and kind of tonally as well, because obviously it's veering wildly from kind of horror and the trauma that this woman's going through to farce. Effectively, the idea of them all like trying to lift the hammer up with their grandpa's hand, and then it's hard not to. It's just such an overwhelming scene in a lot of different ways.
I think it's what madness would feel like.
Yeah,
just that scene on a loop. Okay, so now seems like a good time to wrap up then. So I'm particularly keen to hear your final thoughts as a first-time watcher of this film before I give my, as always, unsolicited opinion.
I can see, I think, as I've mentioned with the Beatles, I can see why this film has been so influential.
Okay.
And I think that's important to remember because whether you
because it's so catchy.
yeah. Because whether you like a film,
see.
I think that it's important to separate those things. Whether you like a movie or not, you can understand why. You can understand its appeal.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I still stand by a lot of my critiques. I wasn't sure how the way this episode would go, whether I'd have my opinions justified, not justified, but like my opinions changed actually, because I kind of was open to it because I know this film is massively influential. It's there's a reason it's on.
It's really well loved
on so many kind of like movies you must see before you die lists.
Yeah.
And I wanted to understand why that was the case. But like I said, I think I'd want to watch it again with a more kind of with a deeper viewing of it. Go more sort of deep into the actual film itself and work out what it's trying to say rather than what it's doing.
Yeah, I think that would be a good shout, to be honest. I don't know how many watches this was for me. And it's really difficult to comment on to some degree because I've seen most of the sequels and the reboots and the remake. And they all start to kind of bleed together.
Yeah.
To some degree. I think it rightfully is among horror classics. Again, much like you, it's really tough because my kind of critic, the film critic part of me, is like, this is a masterpiece of horror cinema, quite rightly revered by critics and audiences alike. And then there's the normal part of me. There is no normal part of me. What am I saying? The other part of me, as if any of me's normal, is like, yeah, it's a cool film. I appreciate what it's saying. I appreciate what they did, but I'm not in a mad rush to watch it time and time again, like I am with a lot of my other horror favourites.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not an enjoyable watch for me. And the older I get, the more I watch films purely for enjoyment. I rewatch things because I know I'm going to have fun with them. And this to me is anything but a fun ride. And I think that is my sticking point.
Yeah, but then it's not even like it. I wouldn't even say it's a tough watch like other films. I didn't struggle to get through it. I didn't feel ill watching it. Like the film, like Cannibal Holocaust, which was what, a couple of years earlier, later.
Cannibal Holocaust I think was like 80 maybe.
Oh, really that late? Okay, just remembering it.
78, 79, 80.
Okay.
I don't know, stop me when something sounds right.
But that was a tough watch.
Yeah, agreed.
Whereas this,
but what about that was a tough watch? Was it the animal cruelty?
Might have been. It might have been.
I think that is the difference, though, isn't it? And that's kind of cementing what Texas Chain Saw Massacre is sort of saying. Like, for me, the hardest parts of Cannibal Holocaust to watch were the animal cruelty because we know it's real. Whereas when you see people being hacked up, we know it's fake. Or you hope. I've never seen a snuff film. I don't care to. But I think that's the difference, isn't it? And I don't know. I definitely appreciate this film. I think it has moments of genuine kind of... it's not like a searing commentary. It's not, to me at least, it's not Romero levels of political commentary. I think it has a lot of interesting things to say, should you want to delve into that. Some of them are intentional. I think some of them are probably accidental, just serendipitous. I think the performances are really interesting, but it's difficult to enjoy because I know what the actors endured on set, and it's really hard not to feel for them. And I just think it's it's a real fucking downer, man. I think that's what I keep coming back to. I'm not I like to be challenged by films. I really do.
Yeah.
Hence my love of things like Climax. But I struggle to find much about this that makes me want to revisit it time and time again, despite acknowledging it for like the trope setting, pioneering horror film that it is.
Again, it's and I'm not saying this to discredit it. It's a product of its time, and it's hard to separate from the countless, let alone prequels and sequels, but the countless similar films that have come out since.
Yeah, I think one thing I would like to end on, though, that we haven't mentioned yet, and that I think warrants it is, to me at least, still quite scary. Okay. I think perhaps some of that is because it takes me back to being a teenager.
Yeah.
And everything's a bit fresher when you're a teenager. It was easier to find films that scared you. 25 years later, not so easy. But yeah, so it is kind of nostalgic to that end. But there are certain moments because of that, like when you first see Leatherface emerge, just that shot of him in the doorway, backed by all the skulls on the wall. I'll never forget that imagery. And that iconic moment where he kind of grabs, is it Pam?
Pam
and
is a
pulls her
character.
back through the door. It's so iconic. It's so influential. And I just think it's rightfully held in high regard.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right.
I'm being very diplomatic.
It's tough
partisan.
Because again, it's tough. Like, and guys, please don't hate us for our opinions. But it's trying to juggle the knowledge that it is influential and it has been so well received and revered by a load of people, but also how you actually feel of it.
Can I just add? Feel free to hate me for my opinion. I'm a dick sometimes. I promise I won't lecture you about going vegan, guys.
I mean, I did comment that Sally probably injured herself more by jumping out of windows than actually anything that Leatherface did.
Barreled through at least 2 windows. That's got to take its toll, man. Impressive stunt work, though. But yeah, that's a wrap.
Yeah.
On the Texas Chainsaw. No, sorry, the Texas Chain Saw Massacre.
Is it 2 words?
Because apparently that was a fuck up. Yeah.
Oh, really?
It's only ever been 2 words in the first movie.
Ah, interesting.
As far as I know, every subsequent movie has been chainsaw because it is 1 word, but not in the first one.
Interesting. Yeah. I picked up on that. Yeah, guys, if you have any juicy tidbits of information that you'd like to share with us, or kind of interpretations of this movie that perhaps we haven't covered, feel free to give us a shout on the social media, the good social media, not TikToks, the other ones.
Yeah, we don't have a TikTok. We're far too old. I can't cope with that. Certainly Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, though.
Yes, for sure. And, if you did enjoy what we said, we do have a Patreon where you can join our private Discord and get access to twice as much content, because we do mini-sodes every other week, which are just as long as our regular episodes. So
double the fun. Just saying.
So until next time, stay spooky. Stay spooky. Go vegan. Viva la bone lamp.